Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. Time for your Indie Spotlight for the week of November 20th, 2024. Pretty big week, not as big as last week. And honestly, there's probably a few more books that I would talk about this week that are coming out indie wise if I had had a chance to read them. But I had to read a whole entire novel over the weekend to do an interview. And I had to reread part of the Minor Threats universe and then read some of the Minor Threats stuff that I hadn't read because I hadn't read Barfly yet. And then I also I got to read the first three issues of the upcoming Minor Threats series, Brood, which is so amazing from writer Heath Corson. That's
Right on.
coming up. The first issue's coming out in December. So yeah, I had all that stuff to read. So I just didn't have a chance to read as much of the independent stuff as I normally would. So I still have five books. And I think these are all deserving of being in the top five. Rocky has four. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. Real quickly before we do that, if you're looking for our thoughts on the DC stuff, as it does every week, it's coming out on Rocky's channel, Comic Boom on YouTube. So Comic Space Boom, exclamation point. We give our top five DC books. Pretty much talked about everything but one book because there's 11 DC books that came out this week. So we talked in depth about 10 of the 11. Gave our top picks. So head over there if you want to get our thoughts on DC, or if you prefer audio only. As always, all the content comes out on the podcast feed. For the Comic Source, just do a search for the Comic Source for whatever app or platform you like to get your podcast from. And then obviously, if you're joining us here on YouTube on the Comic Source channel, you found us. Now that you have, please like, subscribe, let me know what books we should be checking out in the comments below, as well as ring that notification bell so that you know when new content is coming out. Also, in terms of leaving that commentary or leaving a comment in the comments for this video, don't forget that's how we're going to determine who is getting the Global Comics giveaway every week, right? So we have codes that are good for 30 days of Global Comics, a month free subscription for Global Comics. We're going to give away the first one this week. So only a couple people left comments last week on the episode for last week's Independent. So I never know how to say this guy's name. He's one of our most steadfast viewers. He leaves comments on Rockies. He leaves comments on mine. Joshua in Gobo 1559. That's how I'm gonna say it. Hope that's
Yeah.
right. But anyway, Josh, hit me up on social media or send me an email, jace at lrmonline.com or the Comic Source blog at gmail.com, whichever way you want to reach out. And I will get you your code so you'll have 30 days to check out the Global Comics platform and see if you dig it and want to keep subscribing. So you are the first winner. And again, thanks to Global Comics for providing the codes and for giving us an opportunity to help promote the platform. I think it's very worthwhile. I use it myself. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, Josh, hit me up and then let us know what you think of the platform when you get a chance to check it out. So let's go ahead and dive into the first book that I'm going to talk about this week. And if you had a chance earlier this week to listen to my interview, I got a chance to chat with Lee Lowridge and Andrew Robinson about Standstill. It is such a damn good book. Oh my God, it gets my highest possible recommendation. Lee Lowridge handles the story, and he's known for being a color artist. He's been like a color artist for like 30 years in comics, but he's starting to write his own stories, and I'm glad he is because he's a fantastic writer. Andrew Robinson handles the pages, the art for pages 1 through 21, and then Alex Regal 22 through 45. Design and lettering by Rob Tweedy. And what's interesting about this book, and I can't really do it justice here because this is the press preview, which isn't quite the same as like the regular digital copy, or certainly when you get a hard copy, a physical copy. The entire book is double page spreads, and we talked about that in the interview about the choice to do that and what it allows Andrew to do, and they talked about wanting to do it as a landscape book, like Echolands did, but there was issues with the printing of Echolands and also sales and what have you. That was the J.H. Williams book. And so they ended up doing it this way, and it does really work, and it's really fantastic, and it adds to the cinematic feel of the book. It allows that Andrew Robinson artwork to shine through for detail and what have you. And again, Andrew and I talked about this. It's an action-packed book, but there are quiet moments as well. And I specifically want to call out this one panel right there, where this female scientist is just leaning against the wall while
Yeah.
the male scientist Colin is on the toilet. And so like just that body language, it tells you everything you need to know about their relationship and what's going on and how when you're just waiting for something to happen and you're like sitting on the toilet, not waiting for that to happen, but other things, which I'll talk about the story in a minute. But it's just brilliant. It's brilliant storytelling. It's brilliant character work. It just informs who these characters are and gives you an idea. So the whole idea of the story and why these two scientists are working together again is because at one point they created this device that could stop time. And before they even had a chance to fully test it, it was taken away from them. It was locked up by the government, put in this vault somewhere. Well, someone has stolen that, and they're stopping time, and they're going around and they're killing people. And so these two scientists have gotten back together. They built another one, and they're trying to figure out, at this point, it's attached to Colin. It like has to be attached like intravenously. So it's like literally in his blood. On his wrist, not anywhere gross. And no, he's on the toilet here, but he's trying to figure out how to activate it. So that's where the waiting around comes in. Now, what's great is in this issue four of eight, so we're halfway through here, is that we start to get some clues about the motivation of why this guy, the bad guy, Ryker, and he's not even really a bad guy, but he's a guy that's doing some pretty terrible stuff, but he's doing it to pretty terrible people. And we start to get some clues in this issue. First of all, we see Colin, the male scientist here, start to figure it out. But also we start to get some clues about why Ryker might be doing what he's doing. So we saw him kill a bunch of bikers who had apparently murdered a young girl. We saw him call a celebrity influencer to task who got one of her supposed friends slash followers, hooked on drugs and then kind of abandoned her or whatever. So he's done some pretty despicable stuff, but he's doing it to some pretty despicable people. So you can kind of understand, like when he doesn't kill that influencer, but he does kill her dog, which that's probably the closest he's come to going over the line. And she dresses him up. She dresses the dog up in a little tuxedo. And he's like, when you dressed your dog in human clothes, you've sealed his fate. But he empties her safe. He empties her safe and he steals her car. It's like a convertible BMW. And he goes down to Skid Row in LA and he throws all the jewels and money out to give to the poor. It doesn't exactly work out well because people find out, these gangbangers find out all the money's down there and they go in and kill a bunch of the homeless people for the proceeds. So yeah, he's not exactly a good guy, but he's maybe not as bad as he first appears. It seems he has a reason for doing what he's doing, and that's the clue that we get in this particular issue, where we start to have an idea of why he's willing or why he's doing the things that he's doing. And I think the other thing about it is about the series overall is kind of the motto of the series that Lee has put in here a couple times. And Ryker, he eats at a diner after taking out the bikers in that first issue. And he ends up leaving like a huge tip, like thousands and thousands and thousands, like bricks of money to the waitress as a tip. But before he does that, he asks her, he said, if you could stop time, what wouldn't you do? And she's like, oh, well, if I could stop time, probably go like rob a bank and be set for life and not have to worry about, money or bills. And he's like, no, I didn't ask what you would do. I asked, what wouldn't you do? Right. And it basically asking the question, if you could get away with anything, what wouldn't you do? And so it's just a fantastic series, from the art to the pacing. These guys are pouring their heart and soul into it. So I highly recommend it. I recommend you go listen to my conversation with them. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, the art, the first issue sold out, but there's a second printing. None of the subsequent issues have sold out, so you should be able to find it at your comic shop, all three issues. So All right. Up next from one of our favorite I guess we'll call them a publisher. I mean, they publish through Image, but they're their own imprint. They have their latest series debuting today. It's Rocketfellers from writer Peter J. Tomasi, as well as Francis Manapul. They're both credited as story, so they're plotting it together. They're planning the story out together. Peter's J. Tomasi scripting it. Francis Manapul's doing the art. We have Rob Lee on letters. And Francis, as he often does, colors his own work as well. So this is on your list, Rocky, your top five. Give us your thoughts on it.
This is I've never been a consistent reader of Marvel Comics Fantastic Four. I got into it for a little bit, a couple of years, probably about 20 years ago, and then I stopped. They've never really resonated with me. But so when I approach Rocketfellers with some trepidation, because I don't know if maybe I would find it all that interesting, but I do. I find this far more interesting. This family called Rocketfellers. I mean, the name is a little bit tropey. It's a it's a ripoff Rockefellers. They're a family from that basically have escaped the future and they're hiding in the past. And it's the character work by writer Peter Tomasi that really works. And Francis Manapul, his art is just fantastic. The way that he renders these characters, their facial expressions, because just the dynamic between them, and also the special effects. I call them special effects, but it's the art. But you really get a sense of the science. This is science fiction at its finest. It's reminds me of it's almost like a a more realistic version of the Jetsons thrown back in this time. But it's not the Jetsons meet the Flintstones. It's the Jetsons meets the I guess the 21st century. But we got a hint of what the story was in sort of a preview issue of Ghost Machine that they put out a couple months ago. And this just sort of builds on that. And for whatever reason, the Rockefeller family, they're hiding out in the past, and they can't be brought back to the future until it's safe to do so. And in the meantime, this is sort of like their origin story. What gets them trapped in the 21st century? So for people, if you want to get on board to an opening issue about a family, a real cool family that tragically one of them is lost in this opening issue as they sort of escape to the past. And what's at stake and what they've lost, and just all their dynamics, the character dynamics, and this is a story that is grounded in. It really is grounded in the relationship of the characters between the parents and the kids. And these are genius, these are fairly intelligent kids, and the way they have to interact with interact in school in the 20th century, in the 21st century, and while at the same time always have this dark cloud hanging over their heads that they could be discovered by potential agents of the future. And the villain of the piece, this individual in the future we don't know. She's a very intimidating woman. She looks like she's wearing a sort of a metallic mask. She looks intimidating, gorgeously rendered. She looks particularly terrifying, I think. And even on the machines that she rides on, Francis Manapul does a really good job of rendering futuristic looking vehicles, because clearly sky's the limit here. He had the only resource he had thankfully was his imagination, and he's got a good one. And just the way that he renders these vehicles, and he renders the future, and he renders even the way that the characters react to what's around them, and how they interact with each other. It just really works. It's paced well, and it really sort of pulls you in. This feels like something that if you want a good if you want to get somebody into comics and particularly Ghost Machine, that whole line of comic books, I mean, this would definitely be one to get them in. Anybody who's just interested in comics, and frankly, this is all ages. Particularly young kids, not just adults, but younger kids might really enjoy this and even relate to some of the younger characters here in this narrative. The art, and again, the art is just fantastic, and it does have some adult themes. It deals with loss, it deals with sacrifice, it deals with heroism. And what's great is that we don't just have one hero's journey. You get a sense that all of these characters within this in this family have their own individual hero's journey to go on, because they got their different sensibilities, their different ways of looking at life, because they're different characters, but within the same family. And I got to say, there's also the variant covers are pretty cool too. I remember, I think it was Jeff Johns that was saying that they're going to try they're going to try to limit the variant covers for all these Ghost Machine titles to just no more than 2 or 3, I think. But I mean, some of them are so gorgeous. I wish they would have more. But no, this is a high recommend for me. I really enjoyed this, and this is absolutely on my, we're not only privileged to be able to review preview copies, but I will be buying the physical copy of this for sure. And of course, I love Peter Tomasi, and I know from his rendering and scripting, if you like Super Sons, you guys will definitely like the characterization here. So,
Yeah,
did you manage? Yeah, you read it?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I read everything. Yeah, everything Ghost Machine does pretty much ascends to the top of my pile. And I'm also, even though again we get the press previews, I am and have bought every Ghost Machine issue. And as far as that Ghost Machine sampler, I've bought many, many, and I've given them away to people. And in fact, I got one signed by Jeff Johns for one of the guys at my comic shop, and just gave it to him because I think it was at one of our my local comic shops, warehouse sales. They bought so many of that sampler, they were selling for $1. So yeah, I picked up a couple extras and was able to give some away. But yeah, everything Ghost Machine's doing has been fantastic, and Rocketfellers is no exception. The only thing I have to add to your review is, you're crediting Peter J. Tomasi with such great characterization. I want to be clear, Francis Manapul, co-storyteller, he's got a lot to do with that characterization as well, and then obviously the character acting and emotion and faces and all that as well. So, but I know Pete would be the first one to say, "Hey, I'm not the only one that's writing this.
Fair
Francis
enough.
is writing it as well." It's just that Pete is putting the words in the word balloons. That's kind of they're crafting the story, plotting the story out together. Pete's handling the words. Francis is handling the pictures. But you're right. It does have a little bit of a Fantastic Four feel. It does have an all ages feel. It's very approachable. But it is science fiction, and it is science fun. The characters do feel real so far, and they feel fun, and I'm excited to learn more. I will say that if you haven't read the sampler, I think I would actually recommend you read this first issue of Rocketfellers before, like the story that we got in the sampler feels like it's a little further along with them having been living in the past than this.
Yes, it
feels like
is.
it takes
Yes.
place. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to read this first, and then maybe after the first arc, then go and read the Rockefeller story in the sampler. But I mean, it's light spoilers. It's not like anything that ruins the story or what have you. So we have a mother, a father, a grandfather, a son, a daughter, and a little puppy, and a grandmother as well. So that's the family of the Rocketfellers, and yeah, there is the humor of the whole kind of fish out of water part of the story as well. Them having traveled back to the past and trying to fit in. The mystery, what we don't know at this point, is why they're having to hide out in the past. The only clue we get is when they are able to communicate back to an uncle they left behind, and it has something to do with this. We see the wife, the mother here saying, "Yeah, our family, our lives, our future, all blown apart for good because of this," and whatever this is. It kind of looks like an eyeball with.
Yeah.
But and an eyeball with like surrounded by skin with eyelashes. Like that's not how eyeballs work. Like you take an eyeball out, but I don't know what else it could be. Yeah, it looks creepy, but yeah. Next issue, rocking around the Christmas tree. Another play on the Rocketfellers thing, and I showed the cover earlier. But yeah, The halls aren't the only thing about to be decked. Issue 2, love that cover. Um, so yeah, that'll be coming out next month. I'm sure we'll talk about it as well. So yeah, big fan of the first issue. Uh, Big chunk of story too. It's like I think like 40 pages. So we got quite a bit in the first issue of Rocketfellers. So yeah, definitely recommend it. Speaking of Ghost Machine, we also have their very first title that came out um, when they were actually known as Mad Ghost. We have the latest issue of Geiger out this week as well. This is issue number 8. This is written by Jeff Johns. Uh, Geiger co-created by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. We have Paul Pelletier as guest penciler on this issue, Andrew Hennessy handling the inks, John Kalis on colors, Rob Lee on letters. Um, Interesting that the line weights feel a little thicker here for Paul Pelletier than what I'm used to seeing. Pelletier worked with Jeff Johns on his Aquaman during his Aquaman run, if I'm not mistaken, for an issue or two, along with Yvonne Reese. A little bit of a setup issue here. We saw last issue that Geiger and Nate, the Nuclear Knight, saved these kids who were out foraging for books, save them from some of the radioactive insects that are out in the world of Geiger now, and they take them back to their home, and we find out that they're living in this little village called Grover's Corners, and it's through this sort of weather anomaly, and I don't know how this would actually work. I'm just gonna say that it works because for uh, purposes of the story, because I sort of feel like it wouldn't. Like supposedly they're surrounded by mountains and it's a valley, and so it's kept the nuclear waste out. I just don't see that working. Like the air is going to be contaminated in some way, shape, or form, even if the wind doesn't necessarily blow it there. It just eventually is going to spread everywhere. But anyway, for the sake of the story, it's a place where they don't have to have on the radiation suits, and they're raising kids. Many kids have been born there already because, the unnamed war did happen for a while back. So they take the kids there. They're safe. And Geiger wants to leave right away. Nate wants to stay. He's like, hey, it's first chance we get to have like regular food and have some semblance of normality. But Geiger knows how things typically go when he is somewhere. But they do agree to stay for one night because basically the next day, the mayor wants Geiger to tell all the kids how dangerous the outside world is, to kind of keep them from sneaking out in the future, because that's what they've been doing. They've been sneaking out, and they want to protect their children. So that pulls on Geiger's heartstrings. We know that he lost his family in the unnamed war, and his young kids. And so he's willing to stay one night to try to help out. But he has a terrible dream while he's staying there. And so he gets up and he goes for a walk, and he finds that they're burning books. They are burning books. And not to be too on the nose, Jeff Johns, like even the mayor, turns out he was a firefighter. He was only a firefighter for a couple weeks, and when the bombs first fell, and he had some traumatic experiences or what have you. And so Geiger's like, why are you burning books? What's going on here? The books you're burning are classics. They're foundational. They're educational. We know Geiger's a big lover of books, and the argument this firefighter has is, yeah, they're teaching kids about the way the world used to be, and we don't want them to know anything about the way that the world used to be, because then it makes them go out into the world. Like we don't want that. We want to limit ideas. Ideas are dangerous. Ideas are what led to the unnamed war. I mean, what kind of backwards thinking? And when this firefighter says ideas are dangerous, Geiger, and rightly so, in my opinion, says, yeah, so is ignorance, right? Like those that don't know their history doomed to repeat it. Dude, you're living in a pipe dream if you think burning books is going to keep these kids from being curious and wandering off. That's just what kids are. That's what kids do. That's living. Living is learning. But Geiger, to his credit, it's like, these aren't my kids. It's not my decision. He doesn't want to get involved. He's just going to leave. What really sucks is, Geiger, as a lover of books, he had books with them. They snuck into the Nate's room. Nate, the Nuclear Knight, he snuck into his room, took the books, burned those as well. They don't want any books or any knowledge to be passed down. I mean, just the worst possible way to approach something. but also a little bit of a metaphor for the way things are politically, at least in this country. So anyway, they decide to leave. Hey, it's better if we just get out of here now. We're not going to hang around. But as they're about to leave, they're confronted by the forces of Las Vegas. We know that Geiger has a bad history with the crime lords that run Las Vegas, if you will. And man, I can't think that this Grover's Corner place is going to be long for the world now that the gangsters of Las Vegas know that it exists. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. Maybe if Geiger and Nate can manage to kill all these guys, nobody be left to go back and tell the gangs of Las Vegas that it exists. But action packed, really fun, really nuanced as it's been throughout. Geiger's such a conflicted and complicated character. It wouldn't go so far as to say he's a hero. He's done some pretty horrible things himself. He definitely has a temper, but you can kind of understand with everything that he's been through. So I'm really, really enjoying this. Thought Paul Peltier did a pretty good job, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I missed the Gary Frank art. I prefer his line weights. They're a lot lighter, and it gives it kind of a more dynamic feel. But Peltier's storytelling, that's where his strength lies. His transitions from panel to panel, emotionality in faces and what have you is really good. So anything to add, Rocky? Did you get a chance to check this out?
It's the dystopian nature of the setting of Geiger that really stands out for me, and just how it fits into the larger narrative, the larger overarching story of the unknown war, which is what all the Ghost Machine titles are sort of moving toward, this unknown war, and Geiger's role in that, along with all the other characters within the Ghost Machine universe. It's this one is definitely, I don't need to repeat all the plot points there. This was just more great character work and more the humanizing. I mean, in one way, Geiger is this really terrifying looking nuclear sort of green fusion terror, and yet he's the most human character of the entire story, which is always so ironic. But in a future that challenges the human nature, but just it's funny how you got a fireman that's usually a hero, and the fireman in the story is the one that's burning the books. And usually you associate firemen with rescuing and helping people, and here you got this nuclear sort of person, Geiger himself, being the hero of the story. I just like the way that I love the irony of it. And as you said, you don't have to think too hard to see real world reflections in this dystopian future setting. But
Yeah,
well done.
it's a good point. Geiger being the most human of, like he's held on to his humanity better than anybody. So many people have become depraved and turned to crime or doing things like this fireman's doing, and Geiger, the one who's mutated the most, is perhaps the most human of all. It's really fantastic, almost like a Jekyll and Hyde type story. So,
Yeah.
all right, up next, another book on your list, which is, oh man, this book is so good. It's the Power Fantasy issue number 4. It's been selling out left and right, rightly so. Written by Kieran Gillen, Caspar Wingard is the artist, Clayton Cowell on letters, Ryan Hughes handling design. Give us your thoughts on this latest issue of Power Fantasy.
Well, one thing that Kieran Gillen is doing is he's basically telling the story of, is it 6 or 7 superpowered individuals? It's six, right?
Six, yeah, six.
Six, yeah. And he's on some of the issues. The first 3 issues where the stories were larger in scope. And so he'll tell stories that will tell almost approach these heroes and how they interact and how they're more powerful than nation states because they're godlike they have godlike power. And so he'll tell a story that affects the geopolitics of the world, and it's a deeply geopolitical story with ramifications that you can read into, and yet you got these all centered around these very flawed characters that are human but yet godlike and all-powerful. And this is, in this issue 4, we have a more grounded tale that's much more personal, and yet just in many ways is just as it feels like it has just as much gravitas and emotional resonance as the previous 3 issues, because this issue focuses on one of the superpower being humans called Masumi, and she's got a girlfriend, Isabella, and Masumi wants to be an artist, and she's a world-renowned artist, and she's having this big gala. She has this big gala, this big opening, and her big problem and the central thrust, as I saw it in the story, that really resonated with me was she wants to be taken seriously. She wants her art to be taken seriously. And what creator, what artist doesn't want their art to be taken seriously? The problem, of course, is that she's all powerful, and she really desperately wants the approval of this well-known critic by the name of Olivia Brown, and and there's a certain kind of tragedy to this story where Olivia Brown is initially, she's too afraid to give her honest opinion because you don't want to piss off somebody that could literally kill you and wipe out a continent if you put him in a bad mood. And not that this Masumi character isn't like that. She's not bloodthirsty. She's not a villain. She's a kind person, but she is ultra powerful, and she does, because of the nature of these are ultra powerful beings. And so you got to be careful. I mean, you can understand the reluctance of any human being in the world of power fantasy in dealing with any of these six individuals, because they are all powerful. You don't know if you're going to get her on the wrong side. They have a mood swing and boom, you're dead, and maybe something else bad could happen. And this Olivia Brown ultimately acknowledges that she wasn't, she was afraid to give her honest opinion. But when she does, she actually nails it, and she gives an honest opinion, and she manages to make a comment about Masumi's art that actually it was a very insightful observation about Masumi's art, as if Masumi's trying to say something about herself, almost like Masumi feels trapped. And she does feel trapped. She feels trapped because even if she is ultimately talented and she does work toward, and her talent does grow, how will she ever truly know? And there's a tragedy to that, because almost as if who she is and the prejudgment of who she is forever taints the interpretation of her art. And in many ways, isn't that, it's almost speaking outside the comic book, and Kieran Gillen even mentioned this in the commentary in the back of the book, and how often do we do that even as reviewers? And this is probably the darker side of doing reviews. If you happen to have a negative opinion, personal opinion of a particular writer, does that reflect on your interpretation of their work? And whether that's fair or unfair, that's sort of like the nature of humanity. Now imagine if that creator, imagine if Mark Waid had these types of powers, and you had a tumultuous sort of, social media interaction, as sometimes happens. It really sort of makes you think here. It's like, oh, wow. And in any event, I thought the character work worked really well, and in particular, Masumi's relationship with her girlfriend Isabella, who ultimately, Isabella herself has her own kind of emotional insecurities and dysfunction that ultimately the real tragedy comes through at the end, where it's revealed that Isabella's mind is constantly being sort of erased, and her memories are being erased just so that she can continue to persist in what is ultimately a dysfunctional relationship with Masumi. And there's a tragedy to that just, Gillen just does a masterful job sort of hammering it home, and you really see the tragedy of these characters that, outside their huge power sets, these are deeply human, emotional beings that just happen to be ultra powerful. I thought it was a very powerful issue, and it was such a grounded issue that it really works well juxtaposed against the previous issues, which dealt with larger geopolitical issues in the history of this universe. But I thought it worked really well. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think it works really well, but she's not a good artist. She sucks. I guess you missed that part, but we'll talk about it in a second. But no, you're right. I mean, the power of this is that they are inherently flawed. They're so flawed. But they are, intensely powerful. And you're right in that Masumi is not a character that's overtly aggressive, but she is highly emotional, and she's incredibly insecure. And you could see her lashing out if she didn't get the feedback from Olivia Brown that she wants, and the page I have on the screen here kind of reflects that. And you see in the background, one of the other really powerful beings who is probably the most self-aware of all of them. I can't remember what his name is. But he's the most self-aware, and he's the one that he has the ability to manipulate people's minds and memories, and he's the one that's sort of keeping the peace because he's the most logical, and he buys into this idea of kind of utilitarianism. What's good for the most people, what's good for the broadest number of people is the right choice. And we saw that early on in the series where he killed a bunch of people to prevent the entire world from being destroyed. But he's in the background here, and he's saying to Masumi, you have to understand their fear. Of course, people are going to tell you what they want to hear because they don't want to risk the end of the world. And she says, well, she's risking the end of the world here by not telling me what she really thinks. And I love what Olivia Brown says. But what we find out later is this is not Olivia Brown saying this. It's this character in the background. It's this logical superpower. It's his words. He's basically just using Olivia Brown as a puppet. And she says, how great a painter would Hitler have to be to justify the Holocaust? I read that and I was like, holy shit. I mean, we know Kieran Gillen has played in that, period of history before in Uber, where it's a story that universe that postulates what happened if the Nazis had won the war. And then, yes, Olivia Brown does go in and talks about how great the art is and all that stuff Rocky was talking about. And it in a way, it talks Masumi down from the ledge, and she's, excited about it. And she's touched by what's said. And later on, Masumi's girlfriend is trying to calm down and thinking about how close, and how differently things might have went. And when this guy shows up again, and she's like, she could never, specifically hurt me, but she could lash out, if I was ever to break up with her, and if I were to make her unhappy, I have no idea how I got into this mess. And this guy tells, yeah, Italy was destroyed. Your family's dead. You had nowhere to go. So you, in a way, you were thrilled by it, by the danger. And she's like, wait, you're blaming me? And he's like, no, I'm not blaming you at all. I'm just saying that you are hurt. You are vulnerable. And being in love with Masumi is dangerous, but living without love is more dangerous. Attachment to her is very simple, and it's what she needs to stay grounded. Your heart is kind, and you don't have like ulterior motives. You're not trying to use her to get yourself more power or whatever. So, despite these little dangers, it's probably, a good thing that you're with her. And she's like, yeah, okay. Can you do something to help me relax? I mean, she knows that this guy can manipulate. And he's like, yeah, small tweaks, I'm not going to change your personality or whatever, but a little nudge here and there. Who knows, how Masumi might have acted had I not influenced that critic tonight. She goes, wait, what? The critic doesn't think that Masumi's art was good? Then no, she's mediocre. She's never going to be a good artist. And, but having Olivia Brown say that doesn't serve anybody. That's not actually going to do any good. Like, so it's almost like going back to what you were saying earlier about these superpowered beings being they're so inherently human. They're so inherently human, and it shows. And I think it's incredibly accurate. And I've heard this postulated before. Like if human beings in their sort of perfect imperfection actually had the abilities of Superman or the Plutonian or what's the guy from The Boys, the Homelander or whatever, like the world would end.
Yeah.
The world would end. Like it would just be destroyed out of anger, out of jealousy, out of just conflict. That's inherent sort of, in society. And that's what this is, being dialed up to 11. So yeah, I thought it was brilliantly done. And yeah, highly encourage everybody. Make sure you're reading the essay in the back that Kieran Gillen gives us every issue to kind of, this one's called Human, All Too Human. He talks about the choices he makes. And, he's like, I could have done this in, this way or that way, these different ways and told the same story, but it wouldn't have been quite the same story. It wouldn't have been exactly the same story, and so that's why he chose it to tell it in the way that he's telling it, and it's very powerful. I mean, there's a reason that this book is selling out. There's a reason everybody's talking about it, and it's one of these situations where when a book is selling really, really well, and it's getting multiple printings for multiple issues, you want it to be, at least me, I want it to be for the right reasons, not because um, you know there's something controversial, think of Batman Damned or, something like that. But no, have it be for the right reasons. Have it be because the book itself is really good. And that's the case here. I mean, the art by Caspar Wingard is very human as well in a way. It's really fantastic, and it's kind of soft art. It's not huge over the top or whatever. And you talk about, oh well, this book didn't have any action. It doesn't need it because the concepts are so interesting, and it's about interpersonal relationships and interpersonal interactions. That's where the action comes from. That's where the drama comes from. It's just brilliant. Really so good. I was blown away by that issue. All right. Next up on my list from Image, we have Moon Dogs. This is part of the Horizon experiment. We had Pornsak Pichachot on previously to explain what that is. And he talked about his book, which basically was a Chinese James Bond. We had a Muslim John Constantine. We had the writer for that come on as well. And then Evil Dead for Black Nerds. That was the most recent one. And now this is a family of werewolves with East African descent. And how they're navigating the world, basically. And there's lots of themes of racism and classism that's in a different context, because not only are these African Americans, they're werewolves, which that adds a whole nother layer of complexity, but a whole nother layer of persecution with how the rest of the world of the supernatural perceives them. And what they have to do basically to survive and to stick together as a family, because even within their own family, they don't necessarily have agreement on how they should be dealing with this, and how they should be treated and how they should be respected, and whether or not they should be keeping their condition a secret or not, or should reveal it to the larger world. So really interesting. It's by, man, I'm probably going to mispronounce her name. I practiced it, but it's been a while. Tananarive Due, I believe is how you say her name. Kelsey Ramsey is the artist, Jose Villarrubia on colors, Jeff Powell on letters and design, Will Dennis is the editor. This is just done really, really well. And like a lot of the, like all the other Horizon Experiment issue ones, it's a pilot issue. If it sells well enough, they'll do more. So we'd have Tananarive Due come back and do more. And it's a satisfying one issue story, but it does set itself up for so much more. It's set in Miami, which is an interesting choice and very much of kind of a melting pot city. I thought the art by Kelsey Ramsey was very good. It's very dynamic. It's very textured for these werewolves and the action, and I thought the voices were very authentic, and you definitely get a feel. We were supposed to have Kelsey and perhaps Tananarive come on and talk about it, but we just couldn't sync up the schedule. But if I can get them to come on to talk about it, even though the issue's already out, I still will do so, because I'm curious about some of the choices that were made here, and where the story might go. Maybe we can get some hints of where the story might go from here. But yeah, this was really, really good. I didn't necessarily expect to like it as much as I did, but even the character dynamics between the main character and her brother are really interesting. That whole idea of the younger generation, how they know more and know better, and he's kind of like, why should we keep ourselves hidden? We have these abilities, we have these powers. Why should we, stay safe? We should not to the point where he says, we should be ruling or whatever, but he just doesn't want to hide, what he is. And especially when people are bullying him and what have you. But yeah, he's been told his whole life, keep his head down, sort of thing. So yeah, really interesting to kind of flip it on its head. Some of the ideas of of werewolves and those sort of classic horror stories that we've all heard. This is definitely a new take and a take that's a little more rich, I would say, than those werewolf stories that I've read in the past. So, all right, up next, a book that is been around for quite a while, been pretty popular. It's up to issue number 42. It's Ice Cream Man. This particular issue is called Horror House. Still being written by W. Maxwell Prince. Still being drawn by Martin Morazzo. Um, excuse me. I don't read Ice Cream Man. Never have. Haven't read a single issue. Although I do think I have a copy of issue 1, which I think is pretty pricey now. But yeah, I know it's horror. I know it's sort of this anthology with the Ice Cream Man character, sort of the framing character. Is this something you read on a regular basis, Rocky?
I do. I got the trades of the earlier issues, and I started collecting the physical copies at issue 24, 25 or something. And it's really, really good. I'll be honest when I say that it's not too often the comic books that come out. In fact, the EC comic line, for example, has come out with like single issue horror stories. Like there's the Creep Show. Image has released Creep Show, where you got like single issue horror stories. Generally, I'm not a big fan of those. They don't often work. But wow, W. Maxwell Prince here, he shows you how it's done with Ice Cream Man, because his stories are they're just absolutely fantastic. They're really, really good. And he really does delve into the horror. And of course, this Ice Cream Man delivering in the ice cream in in an ice cream truck and then showing up. He's sort of like the 1950s milkman almost, but he delivers ice cream instead. But what he really delivers is horror. And from a metaphysical standpoint, he basically talks outside the comic book. He will routinely break the fourth wall to reinforce the horror of whatever story W. Maxwell Prince is trying to make. And in this particular issue, the reason why I wanted to talk about it is that on the cover, there's always fantastic covers to Ice Cream Man, by the way, and all the covers, even the variant covers, have something very specific to do with the content. We can't always say that about comic books nowadays, so kudos to that. This is about a horror house, but the horror house here, the actual horror of this story is humanity. It's the real world. And C.W. Maxwell, he very very clearly the horror of the story has to do with school shootings. He has 3 different. He actually has New York Times news articles in here dealing with school shootings, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, climate change. Depending on where you may lie on the political spectrum, you may or may not enjoy reading this particular comic, because it makes it very clear what it considers to be a horror show. And it's I don't think it's too hard to imagine who W. Maxwell Prince may have voted for in the last American election. I don't even know if he's American, but in any event, he even if outside of this, this it reinforces the fact that this family that ends up in this horror house, they end up going through various doors, and the doors they go through, they end up in a world where one kid goes through one horror door and ends up at a school shooting, reflective of our actual real world happenings. And another door, a woman goes through one door and finds out she loses control of her bodily autonomy. Another person goes through another door, and you got the detrimental effects of climate change. And the point of the story is that if you want horror, just look outside your own door, and of course you've got the horror of the grandmother of the series with her skin being peeled off. But that's the least of it. That's just the standard horror stuff you see in a horror movie. The actual horror, the stuff that we escape from when we watch horror movies, are the lives we're living right now, as evidenced by, and these are just 3 examples: the school shootings, the overturning of certain of Roe v. Wade, and climate change, and the comic book ends: stand in the light of the sun and be terrified, or read a comic book if that's your thing. Short, sweet, to the point. And even if you don't I don't let the politics of this comic upset me. It actually doesn't. You can impose your own horror because regardless of where you stand on politics, there are, as we know, horrors in this real world that, hell, let's be blunt, we read comics to escape the horror and sometimes to embrace a new horror that at least we can delude ourselves into thinking, well, it's fictional because it's in a comic book. That's called an escape, but you can't escape real life. And that ultimately, unfortunately, is the worst horror of all too many times. And that's what W. Maxwell Prince is just reminding us of. And with great art by Martin Morazzo, again, he's just really, really good at getting those facial expressions. Of all the characters as they're reacting to what's going on around them, and you can't go wrong if you had to go into a comic book store blind and buy a random comic book or somebody who's never read a comic book before. You could always pick up any random Ice Cream Man issue, and it's a self-contained story, and it'll have something to say. I always say I'm a sucker for a good metaphor. There's always metaphors and themes and a message in anything that in the pages of Ice Cream Man. And if you want to gift somebody for Christmas coming up, buy them a hardcover of Ice Cream Man or a trade paperback. They won't be disappointed.
Yeah, super creepy. It's definitely a creepy story. The series has been wildly successful. I think it's even being adapted. I think that's when the early issues really blew up. And I have never seen him do a show. W. Maxwell Prince. Never seen him do a con, so kind of interesting. So,
Mhm.
all right. Up next for me, Dead Eyes: The Empty Frames. This is written by Jerry Dugan, art by John McCrae, colors by Mike Spicer, letters by Joe Sabino. Our main antagonist here, Dead Eyes. We saw he's been planning a final heist to get out of the life of crime. He's definitely an old school type gangster. He uses his fists, tries not to use a gun. We saw last issue that the cops are sort of onto him, that he's trying to recover these paintings, and he's actually going to return them to the museum where they were stolen from decades ago and get the $10 million reward and retire for good. He's trying to get some members of his old crew back together, and obviously he's going to give them a cut or what have you. But the thing is, the guy can't get out of his own way a lot of times, and not to where he's making mistakes or he's not self-aware. He's very self-aware, but he's just he's always in a bad spot. Things never go the way that he needs them to go, and that's kind of how he got in trouble in the first place. When he was kind of planning out this heist, and he went to see this gangster's son, who guy wanted to be a baker, and he got in a fight with him, and he accidentally, he was just supposed to scare him to sort of, knock him out, and he accidentally pushed him into this giant industrial mixer, and like there was mixed cake batter or whatever, and he just killed him, just chopped him up in little pieces, whatever, and so that's kind of where he's at now. Now he's got the cops are following him, and he's trying to still perform this heist, and he wants to make sure the cops aren't on him. So he decides that he's going to send his guys out as decoys, and he's going to pull off the heist himself because he thinks everybody's at the funeral for the guy that he killed. But when he goes in the house, there's this old woman there who has dementia, and he's like, oh, they left her behind, like the matriarch of the family, the crime boss's mother. But she has dementia, so don't need to worry about it. I can, she doesn't really know who I am. I'll just give her medicine, and I'll search around the house. Maybe it's even a good thing. She can tell me where the paintings are hidden. And while he's talking to her, this guy comes out of the bathroom, the nephew, and he's like, "Wait, why are you here?" And they end up getting in a big, huge fight. Nephew pulls out a gun, accidentally shoots the woman in the head. I also forgot to mention, this is after they have a barfing fight, because Deadeyes was so stressed out and worried the night before this. He went out to a bar to hide out, and he drank all night, and so he's super hungover. He's like throwing up all morning, throwing up in the shower or whatever. So he's on this job, and he's like dry heaving, and then he ends up puking on the guy, and it gets in the guy's mouth, and then the guy's like puking back. And yeah, the guy gets mad. He pulls out his gun, and he accidentally shoots his aunt, who's again the crime boss's mother. So he's like, oh, I'm screwed. But no, I'll blame it on Deadeyes is what I'll do. And he actually gets the upper hand um, because Deadeyes goes to open a door where he thinks the paintings are hidden behind it, and he kicks it, and his leg gets stuck in the door, and this guy's gonna shoot him, but he slips in the puke and bangs his head on something and kills himself basically. So Deadeyes is like, oh, maybe things are looking up for me. This guy slipped on puke on the hardwood floor, brained himself. I found the paintings, $10 million worth of paintings. But it's so ludicrous and so like over the top. But the way Dugan writes it and the voice he gives Deadeyes and the John McCrea art, it just makes it work. You can't help but root for Deadeyes, even though he's the bad guy, because his heart's in the right place. Like even from the beginning, um, at the very first issue of this run, he's talking about how when he started out, he was robbing check cashing places because those are worse than banks because of their predatory lending rates and that sort of stuff. Payday loan type places. So that's why he would rob those because they're like scumbags. Um, and so, not too dissimilar from Standstill in that way that, yeah, he's the bad guy, but you can't help but root for him. And again, just the art by John McCrea is so fantastic. So we know from reading this story, anybody who's been reading Deadeyes for any period of time, no, it's not as simple as him walking in, get the paintings, walking out. He even says right there next to the cops. So I imagine the cops are going to show up before he gets a chance to make his escape. And I don't know if puking on the cops might save the day, but yeah, this series is just fun. It's crime noir. It's over the top. It feels authentic, and it's just a heck of a lot of fun. So if it sounds like it's up your alley, definitely check it out. John McCrea, he sort of made his name in American comics on Hitman, Tommy Monahan. If you're a fan of Hitman, you definitely should be reading this. Now that was written by Garth Ennis, and Garth Ennis and Jerry Dugan don't really have like the same sensibilities when it comes to writing comics.
Yeah.
But this is probably the closest they ever get, if you will. Dugan does a fantastic job here of writing this kind of seedy underworld, seedier type of characters. And I don't hear enough people talking about this series. I got to be honest. I feel like more people should be talking about how good Deadeyes is. It did have a cult following it does have a loyal fan base, but I feel like that fan base should be a lot bigger than it is. All right. Up next from Boom Studios, we have the second issue of Vicarious, written by Ryan Parrott, art by Eleonora Carlini, letters by Mattia Iacona, letters by Becca Carey. Supposed to be having Ryan and Eleonora on at some point to talk about this series. It's totally on me. I know Ryan. He's a friend. I met Eleonora at New York Comic Con. Hopefully we'll make it happen at some point, but I just haven't had time, to be honest. But yeah, we really enjoyed the first issue, and now issue 2 is out this week, and it's on Rocky's list. So give us your thoughts on issue 2, Rocky.
First off, full compliments to another amazing cover by Dan Panosian. Just incredible, absolutely incredible. And this Vicarious, well, what does vicarious mean? Well, that old expression, when you live vicariously through someone else, imagine if you could live and experience things through not only the eyes, but the body and the feelings of other people. The lead character in this series is a character by the name of Justin Bright. He was sort of a ne'er-do-well who's sort of taken in by a celebrity by the name of Christian Gold. And he actually saves this Christian Gold movie star-like character from getting beat up in the first issue. And Christian, who is basically a glorified proxy, gives him and hooks him up to become a proxy himself, a proxy being someone who people can experience things through you. So let's say if you're not a very attractive person, but you like to make love to a beautiful woman, you could experience that and have the same sensations by living that experience through a proxy who is doing all the work for you, but you would experience all the same sensations. And that's essentially what Jace that was the setup in the first issue, leading, of course, to what appears to be there's some potential murder mystery shaping up. But in this issue, we meet Justin, who's just getting used to his proxy role, and it's kind of funny at first because he wants it's not just people who maybe want to use it for sexual purposes, but some people like to, maybe they can't eat, but they want to experience different cuisines. And in the opening scene is with him basically Justin eating a bunch of food and gorging himself to the point where he basically throws up because the people want to experience different foods and taste different foods, and so he just gorges himself. So because he gets paid very, very well to be a proxy, he's willing to put his body through all kinds of things in order to satisfy his customers and build up a client base and make some money doing it. I mean, it's basically, in a sense, you're kind of prostituting yourself, but it's not just for sex. It's just for, you do whatever the customer wants, so to speak, whatever they want to experience, you do it, and they feel it. And we get more of a, we get introduced to more characters here. We get introduced to a character by the name of Sylvia Sin, kind of a cool name. She's someone who, as the name might suggest, she seems to be up to no good, but she wants to use Justin and will maybe basically be Justin's glorified pimp. She's an attractive black woman who sort of wants to use him and use him for her own purposes. But at the same time, her motives are maybe a little bit unclear. But we're also introduced to a detective at the end of the issue, Detective Charles Nance, who confronts Justin and warns him about Sylvia Sin and, don't believe what she says. I'll keep an eye on you. They're up to no good. You don't really know what you've gotten yourself into, allowing yourself to be hooked up to this proxy technology and what have you. And so we know. So in the first issue, it ended with what appears to be a murder. This issue, we got more of the players, the chess pieces being put on the board as the story moves forward. Ryan Parrott's done a really good job with the pacing. I quite enjoyed it. Eleonora Carlini art, I think, works really well. The settings, the futuristic. Well, it feels like a present day setting, but you could tell it's slightly maybe 10 or 15, 20 years ahead of us. It works really well. She does a good job with the facial expressions and with the character interactions. There's some touching moments here where that Justin actually sort of helps a couple almost reconcile because, it's like a boyfriend wants to reunite with his girlfriend, and he helps him do that vicariously, I guess, through himself. And anyways, there's actually some really nice character work, and Ryan Parrott does a good job of sort of exploring what all the avenues and all the different options you could have if you could actually be a proxy for another person's actions and emotions. And I think it's a very interesting concept that's handled and illustrated quite well by the creative team in this comic. So
Yeah, really interesting. Justin Bright is not Justin Bright, but only his landlord, who knows what Justin Bright looks like because he's sort of a shut-in. And so we're introduced to Justin Bright in the first issue, and we think it's Justin Bright, and then we find out at the end it's not. The real Justin Bright's been killed. This guy's impersonating him. Who he is a complete mystery. And he's telling the landlord he's Justin Bright's friend, but he's telling everybody else he's Justin Bright. So that's really intriguing as well. Yeah, really, really great series. Definitely recommend it. Great character work, as you said, from Ryan Parrott. So last book I'm going to talk about in detail is one. It's pretty popular. A lot of people have been reading it. One of the top writers in comics right now, James Tynion, The Department of Truth, number 27. Finishing up this 2-issue arc about Marilyn Monroe. James Tynion, as I mentioned, is a writer. Allison Sampson handles the art in this particular issue. Jordi Belair on colors. Letters by Aditya Bidikar. I'm not going to get too into the story. Read it yourself. It's definitely worth checking out. But reason I wanted to talk about it was this idea of, the whole idea of Department of Truth is if enough people believe it's true, then it becomes true. And we have this private eye / bodyguard who's being sent out to guard Marilyn Monroe, if you will, because of the public's perception of who she is. They have that belief that she slept with JFK, so now she's beginning to remember sleeping with him and what have you. but it's sort of this commentary on Hollywood and celebrity. Like if everybody thinks that you're a dumb blonde bimbo, and if enough people believe that, then do you start to become that? Do you start to become what everybody perceives you to be? And you can extrapolate that out, right? And so it's really interesting. And I think Tynan picked the perfect person to write about this, because that certainly um, applies to Marilyn Monroe. Um, and some people say, that's what led to her suicide, all the expectations and what have you. But you can even apply that to us, right? To just regular people, and what are people's expectations? How do they perceive you? What do they believe you to be? And it's easy to fall into that trap. If everybody sees you a particular way, you can kind of morph into that through no fault of your own if you're not careful. So really a fascinating story, great art by Allison Sampson. The whole idea of Department of Truth is fascinating. The fact that Lee Harvey Oswald is the one that runs the department is super interesting. You can see the super trippy art. Definitely a commentary on celebrity and perception and fame. And yeah, it's just really, really expertly done by James Tynan. So definitely recommend checking out Department of Truth. If you haven't read it at all, just pick up issue 26 and 27, this Marilyn Monroe two-parter, and it'll give you a great idea of what the series is about. So, all right, quick rundown on some of the other indie titles that are out this week that you might want to be on the lookout for. House of Slaughter number 27, Radiant Black Ultimate Edition 30, which collects 30 and 30.5. It's the end of the Catalyst War. That's out as well. Walking Dead Deluxe from Robert Kirkman is up to issue number 101. That's basically reprints of The Walking Dead that are in color. The G.I. Joe Real American Hero series that now comes out from Skybound is up to issue number 311. Rat City, which is a future Spawn, if you will, in Todd McFarlane's Spawn universe, is up to issue number 8. We've got issue 26 of Star Trek, which is leading into Lore War. I'm about 2 or 3 issues behind on my Star Trek reading. I was hoping to get caught up this weekend, but I didn't have time. But definitely will be reading that soon. Flash Gordon from Jeremy Adams. We're huge fans of Jeremy. It's up to issue 4. That's an excellent series as well. And there was one other book I wanted to mention. Oh, Prodigy, Slaves of Mars from Mark Miller is out this week as well. Oh, and one other, Pedestrian from Joey Esposito from Magma Comics is up to issue number 4 as well. I've been hearing really great things about that, but I haven't had a chance to read any of Pedestrian, but I will, and I'll be covering issue 5 when it comes out because I want to see what the buzz is about. When it comes to collected editions, no one in that same Radiant Black Massiverse universe from Kyle Higgins, Brian Buccellato, Geraldo Borges has its collected edition coming out this week. I could not recommend that book more. It's maybe my favorite comic of the last 10 years. It's absolutely fantastic. Also, Destro from Skybound for the G.I. Joe Energon universe has its collected edition come out. Collects all 5 issues of the Destro series. And I think there was one other collection that I wanted to mention. Oh, yeah. When the Blood Has Dried from Mad Cave Studios. Had a chance to talk to the creative team for that book when I was at New York Comic Con. Gary Maloney, Daniel Romero, fantasy about a mercenary who tried to escape the old life, and unfortunately it sort of comes back to find her. Her past sort of catches up with her. Great character work, great art, highly recommended if you're into fantasy, basically. So, all right, Rocky, moment of truth. What is your book of the week?
Oh boy. Uh, I would have to go with I'm gonna go with I totally forgot about Department of Truth. I actually really like that issue. I really like that issue. I feel it started at issue 25 because I think it's 25, 26, 27, although it is a 2-issue Marilyn Monroe arc. Anyways, boy, it's tough. I'm gonna go with I'll go with Rocketfellers if for no other reason that it made me feel
Guessed it
like
right.
with Fantastic Four because like I said, I've never really been a Fantastic Four fan, to be honest with you, ever. And Peter J. Tomasi is just, he's just really managed to captivate me. And I got to say, you alluded to it sooner when we talked about it. The preview of the story wasn't as good as this opening issue. This is what sort of like pulled. This is what sort of I liked the preview issue, but this one has solidly made me want to stay with the series. And the art is just fantastic. So by Francis Manapul. So and Rob Lay on the colors. So yeah, I'd go with that one. What about yourself?
I'm going with Standstill from Lee Loughridge and Andrew Robinson. It's close. Like Power Fantasy, was on your list, but it would have been on my list as well. That's definitely deserving. So is Department of Truth. But ultimately, I'm going with Standstill because the art just puts it over the top for me. It's so fantastic. And it was great to talk to those guys this last week about the book. So that gets my nod for Book of the Week. Well, that's going to do it, everybody. Thanks for joining us as always. Don't forget to head over to Rocky's channel, Comics Face Boom! On YouTube to check out our DC Spotlight for the week. Don't forget to leave comments below on this video so you can have a chance to win a code for Global Comics and get a free month to check out the platform. If you are watching this on YouTube and you want to check out the audio only content on the Comic Source, thousands and thousands of past episodes. Plus, hey, maybe it's easier for you to listen on the subway or when driving the car, what have you. Just go to whatever app or platform you get your podcast from. Do a search for the Comic Source and subscribe. And of course, if you are checking us out on YouTube, we just appreciate you liking this video, ringing that notification bell, and subscribing so that we can increase our reach and content. So that's going to do it for this episode. We appreciate you joining us as always, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
Catch you later.